San Andreas Fault in Western California, USA. Here, two of the gigantic moving plates which carry the Earth's continents are pressing together and sometimes slipping, causing movements which range from slight tremors to devastating earthquakes. Watercourses like this one once ran straight across the fault. Over many years, relative movement between the great plates has displaced it, as we can see, vivid evidence for the theory of plate tectonics, the idea of continental drift. And here near Newcastle-on-Tyne, northeastern England, evidence of a different kind. Dr. D.H. Tarling of Newcastle University talks about the magnetism which we find in rocks exposed in this quarry face.
Now, when we collect these rocks from the exposure up on the top there, we can look at their magnetization in samples like this. And what we find in these is that the magnetization is quite different to what we have in present-day sediments in Britain. What we find with these is that the magnetization, in fact, is not very steep as it is in Britain today, but is quite shallow.
This transparent model of the Earth has a magnet inside simulating the Earth's magnetic field. These compass needles indicate the angle of dip in that field at various degrees of latitude. Here, at the present latitude of the British Isles, the angle of dip should be fairly large. This core of rock from the quarry should show magnetization in this direction. But it doesn't. The angle of dip is much smaller, like this. Now this is the angle of dip expected at the equator. Now when a rock is formed, the influence of the Earth's field on the alignment of magnetic substances is locked into it. So when this rock was formed, it must have been near the equator, in the area, say, where the Sahara Desert is today.
Now, if we look at these sediments immediately beneath where we took that sample, we've got these beautiful sort of dunes here with all of the bedding cutting across, exactly the same as you get in dunes in desert areas today. And the grains themselves are all rounded by the wind, exactly the same as you get in the Sahara today.
So the magnetic evidence suggests that where we now have all this sand beneath green English fields was once arid desert near the equator. There's yet another kind of evidence for the idea of moving continents. Professor Edwin Colbert again, the distinguished American paleontologist.
The continents as we know them were once together in a supercontinent, and then they broke apart and drifted to their present positions. Now there's a great deal of physical evidence to corroborate that theory based on our studies of the ocean floors and the continents themselves. And one line of evidence perhaps can be shown by this picture that I did for one of my papers several years ago. Don't pay attention to the letters there. What I want to bring out here now are the outlines of the continents based on the continental blocks, not on the strand lines, which are shown here in light lines, but on the continental blocks themselves at about 1,000 fathoms. And you see in these heavy lines here, this is South America, Africa, and you can see that they fit very closely together. And of course, here we have Antarctica fitting in here, Australia fitting here, Peninsular India fitting here, Madagascar here. Now, Sir Edward Bullard of Cambridge University made computer studies of these fits, as they're called, and those studies showed that those fits are too good to be accidental. They must have significance. The question is, do the fossils corroborate the physical evidence for these fits of the continents? Well, Antarctica is a key region in that respect because at the present time it is isolated, completely isolated from the other continents. And if we should find fossils on Antarctica that are related to fossils in other areas, then there's good reason to think that this theory or this idea of continental drift and plate tectonics is truly valid. For many years, I'd hoped that somebody would go to Antarctica and look for fossils, and as luck would have it, I went down there about 10 years ago to search for fossils, and sure enough, we did find fossils. Now, here's where these little letters and dots come in. we found fossils here about 350 miles from the South Pole, which you see in this location here. And these fossils were identical with fossils that had been found previously in South Africa and in peninsular India, as you see here.
This is a reconstruction of the early amphibian Lystrosaurus, based on fossil evidence. Let's concentrate on the skull, and in particular on this region here. This is a fossilized Lystrosaurus skull found in South Africa, with the region in question painted white for clarity. And here's a portion of fossilized Lystrosaurus skull found in the Antarctic. The blackened area corresponds exactly with the white area on the African specimen. The animal had small tusks like this. They're present on the South African fossil and also on the one found in the Antarctic. These animals must once have lived and died on the same part of the Earth's surface. When the supercontinent drifted apart, the remains were separated, so that one fossil turned up in Africa, another in the polar region. The evidence suggests then that 200 million years ago there was this enormous supercontinent. 180 million years ago it was separating up. By 65 million years ago the map was this, and here's the Earth as we know it today. Many features of animal and plant distribution, past and present, can be explained by continental drift. For instance, we find fossil trees in the now arid desert of northern Arizona, showing that the climate was once much moister. Great earth movements caused by shifting plates produced the high Sierras and the Rockies. They brought arid conditions which, possibly, extinguished those giant dinosaurs, an example of how animal and plant populations have been exposed to changing selective influences over geological time. The concept of continental drift has a further relevance to the study of evolution. The unique mammal life of Australia, its marsupials, like the kangaroos for example, is accounted for by its isolation long before placental mammals evolved elsewhere. Isolation is an important factor in the process of evolution. Can we still detect the effects of isolation, even on a very much smaller scale, going on today? Let's take a look at some much smaller islands.
I never dreamt that islands about 50 or 60 miles apart